Welcome back to the channel. Today's story follows Emily, a hardworking young woman whose life changes forever after receiving a desperate phone call from her younger sister. Emily had spent years building a quiet life in another city, working long hours as a financial analyst while sending money home whenever she could. Although she loved her family deeply, the relationship had grown distant over the years. Her mother, Margaret, had always favored Emily's older brother, Daniel, believing he would one day become the family's greatest success. Emily never complained, even when she was overlooked during birthdays, holidays, and important family decisions. She simply focused on her career and hoped that one day her hard work would earn her mother's respect. One rainy Tuesday afternoon, just as Emily was finishing a meeting, her phone vibrated repeatedly. The caller ID showed her younger sister, Chloe. Chloe rarely called during work hours, so Emily answered immediately. Through tears, Chloe cried, "Emily, Mom collapsed this morning. She's in the emergency room. The doctors say she needs emergency surgery, and the hospital estimates it could cost around $155,000. Daniel said he can't get here until tomorrow. Please come. We don't know what to do." Emily's heart sank. Without asking another question, she grabbed her purse, informed her manager of the emergency, and rushed toward the airport. During the flight, countless memories flooded her mind: her mother's laughter before life became difficult, family dinners, and the sacrifices Emily had quietly made to support everyone whenever financial troubles arose. She silently prayed that her mother would survive. Hours later, Emily finally reached the hospital. The emergency department was crowded with anxious families and exhausted medical staff rushing through the hallways. She spotted Chloe sitting alone with red, swollen eyes. The sisters hugged tightly before Chloe whispered that their mother was still undergoing tests. Emily immediately asked where Daniel was. Chloe looked away and admitted she hadn't heard from him since his earlier phone call. Emily felt disappointed but pushed those feelings aside. Right now, only their mother's health mattered. A hospital administrator soon approached them carrying a thick folder of documents. He explained that the surgery needed to happen quickly, but financial approval was still pending because the estimated treatment costs were extremely high. Emily didn't hesitate. She carefully reviewed every page before saying, "I'll guarantee the payment. My mother's life comes first." The administrator thanked her and hurried away to process the paperwork. Chloe stared at Emily in disbelief, asking how she could make such a huge commitment without discussing it with anyone else. Emily simply smiled and replied, "Money can be earned again. We only have one mother." As they waited outside the operating area, Emily noticed two strangers speaking quietly with one of the hospital lawyers. One of them glanced repeatedly toward her family before walking away. Something about their behavior felt unusual, but Emily was too worried about her mother to think much about it. Late that evening, Daniel finally arrived at the hospital looking nervous rather than concerned. Instead of asking about their mother's condition, his first question was, "Who signed the financial papers?" Emily answered honestly that she had. Daniel's expression suddenly changed, and instead of thanking her, he looked almost alarmed. He muttered that she should have waited before signing anything because there were other matters the family needed to discuss. Emily frowned, confused by his reaction. Their mother was fighting for her life, yet Daniel seemed far more interested in paperwork than her recovery. Before Emily could question him further, a doctor stepped out of the operating room with a serious expression, calling Emily's name. Every heartbeat seemed to stop as she stood up, fearing the next words might change her life forever. The doctor removed her surgical mask and smiled gently before speaking. "Emily, your mother made it through surgery successfully. The next 24 hours will be critical, but right now she is stable." Emily felt every ounce of tension leave her body as tears streamed down her face. Chloe hugged her tightly, thanking God for the miracle they had been praying for all day. Even Daniel let out a sigh of relief, though his expression quickly shifted back to one of nervousness. As their mother was transferred to the intensive care unit, the doctor asked Emily to accompany him to his office. Once inside, he explained that Margaret had arrived just in time. Another hour of delay could have been fatal. He also thanked Emily for approving the financial guarantee so quickly because the hospital had been able to begin treatment without hesitation. Emily simply nodded, grateful that her decision had saved her mother's life. However, before she left the office, the doctor handed her a sealed envelope that had been placed in her mother's medical file months earlier. "Your mother instructed us to give this only to you if she was ever unable to speak for herself," he explained. Confused, Emily opened the envelope in the quiet waiting room. Inside was a handwritten letter. Her mother's handwriting was shaky but unmistakable. Margaret admitted that she had carried a heavy burden of guilt for years. She confessed that Emily had always been the most responsible child, yet she had often taken her kindness for granted while giving Daniel endless chances to prove himself. Margaret wrote that Daniel had repeatedly borrowed large amounts of money from her, promising to invest in successful businesses, but every investment had failed. To cover his debts, he had secretly convinced their mother to refinance her home several times. Margaret had hoped he would eventually recover financially, but instead the debts continued to grow until they reached a terrifying level. Emily's hands trembled as she finished reading the letter. Suddenly Daniel's strange behavior made perfect sense. Moments later, Daniel approached cautiously. "Can we talk?" he asked. Emily followed him into an empty family consultation room. He closed the door behind them before speaking in a low voice. "You weren't supposed to sign those hospital papers so quickly." Emily stared at him in disbelief. "What does that even mean?" "Mom needed emergency surgery." Daniel sighed deeply before admitting the truth. He confessed that creditors had been demanding payment for months. If their mother died before the debts became public, several insurance policies and legal arrangements would have covered everything, leaving the family financially secure. But because Emily guaranteed the hospital expenses and Margaret survived, the creditors would soon discover the family's financial situation. Emily could hardly believe what she was hearing. "Are you saying you were willing to risk Mom's life because of money?" she asked, her voice shaking with anger. Daniel insisted that wasn't what he meant, but every explanation only made him sound more selfish. He admitted that he had delayed coming to the hospital because he had been meeting with lawyers and lenders, hoping to find a solution before anyone else became involved. Emily reminded him that while he worried about paperwork, their mother had been fighting for every breath. Chloe quietly entered the room after overhearing part of the conversation. Tears filled her eyes as Daniel finally admitted that nearly all of the family's financial problems were the result of his failed business ventures and reckless spending. Chloe was devastated. For years she had believed Emily was simply the successful sister who lived comfortably in another city, never realizing how much Emily had sacrificed or how much Daniel had hidden. Just then, the hospital lawyer returned with another folder. He explained that because Emily had signed the financial guarantee, she had the legal authority to review several important documents regarding her mother's care. Among them was an updated will prepared only weeks earlier. Margaret had quietly changed many of her previous decisions after discovering the full extent of Daniel's deception. Emily refused to read the documents immediately. "None of this matters until Mom wakes up," she said firmly. "She's alive, and that's what matters most." As the siblings returned to the ICU waiting area, Emily looked through the glass window at her unconscious mother surrounded by life-saving machines. She silently promised herself that no matter how painful the truth became, she would protect her mother and uncover every secret that had nearly destroyed their family. Little did she know, the biggest revelation was still waiting to be discovered. The following morning, Emily arrived at the hospital before sunrise. She carried fresh coffee for Chloe and quietly sat beside her outside the intensive care unit. Neither sister had slept much. The shocking conversation with Daniel replayed over and over in Emily's mind, but she refused to let anger distract her from the most important thing, her mother's recovery. A few hours later, a nurse hurried toward them with a smile. "She's awake," she said. Emily and Chloe immediately entered the room. Margaret looked weak, but her eyes brightened the moment she saw her daughters. Emily gently held her mother's hand, fighting back tears. "You're safe now, Mom," she whispered. Margaret squeezed her hand and softly replied, "I'm alive because of you." After the doctor completed his examination and assured them that Margaret was recovering well, the family gathered in her private room. Daniel stood quietly near the window, unable to meet anyone's eyes. Margaret looked at each of her children before taking a deep breath. "There are things I should have told you years ago," she began. "I made mistakes as a mother. I believed Daniel whenever he promised he would fix everything, and I ignored the sacrifices Emily made because I assumed she would always be strong enough to carry the burden." Tears rolled down her cheeks as she apologized directly to Emily. "You deserved appreciation, not silence. You deserved trust, not neglect. I am so sorry." Emily leaned forward and embraced her gently. "The past can't be changed, Mom. The only thing that matters is that you're here." Margaret then asked her lawyer, who had arrived earlier that morning, to bring everyone into the conference room. Once seated, the lawyer opened the updated estate documents. Margaret explained that after discovering Daniel's hidden debts, she had rewritten her will. The family home would no longer be used to pay for Daniel's financial mistakes. Instead, it would be placed in a family trust to ensure Chloe always had a secure place to live if she ever needed it. Emily was named the executor of the estate because Margaret trusted her judgment and honesty. Daniel lowered his head as every word reminded him of the consequences of his actions. He finally stood up and admitted everything without excuses. He confessed to wasting money on risky investments, expensive cars, and luxury vacations while pretending his businesses were successful. He apologized to his mother, to Chloe, and especially to Emily for allowing greed and pride to blind him. The room remained silent for several moments before Emily spoke. "An apology is important, but real change takes action. If you truly want forgiveness, you need to accept responsibility." Daniel nodded. He agreed to sell his remaining assets, cooperate with creditors, and begin repaying every debt instead of expecting someone else to rescue him. Margaret looked relieved, knowing her son had finally accepted the truth. Over the following months, life slowly returned to normal. Margaret recovered with physical therapy and regular medical checkups. Chloe completed her nursing degree, inspired by the doctors and nurses who had saved their mother's life. Daniel found steady employment and worked diligently to repay what he owed, proving through actions rather than promises that he wanted to rebuild the family's trust. Emily continued her successful career but visited home much more often. This time, every visit was filled with laughter instead of tension. One evening, the family gathered for dinner in the same house where they had shared countless memories. Margaret stood and raised her glass of water with a warm smile. "This family nearly fell apart because we allowed money to become more important than honesty and love." Emily reminded us that no amount of money is worth more than a human life. "She didn't hesitate when I needed her most, and because of her courage, I have been given a second chance." Everyone looked at Emily with gratitude. She smiled modestly and replied, "Families aren't perfect. We all make mistakes. What matters is choosing compassion over greed, forgiveness over resentment, and truth over lies." As the evening ended, Emily stepped outside and looked up at the stars. She realized that the greatest gift she had received wasn't financial security or recognition, it was the chance to heal a broken family before it was too late. Sometimes the richest person isn't the one with the most money, but the one whose heart is filled with love, integrity, and the courage to do the right thing when everyone else walks away.